Hello, everybody, and welcome once again to So You Think You Know the Red Sox with Bernie Stroum. Today, we're turning back the clock to 1980. It was the first year I followed the Boston Red Sox from the West Coast. I lived in Los Angeles in 1980. I didn't no longer went regularly to Fenway Park. Actually, hadn't gone regularly to Fenway Park for a number of years since I started to work and had a home he had to take care of. But now it was impossible, even if I thought about going. It was a 3,000-mile trip away. So, first thing I did when I moved to LA was install a 12-foot satellite dish so I could watch the Red Sox. Cost $8,000, $7,500 back in 1980. That was a lot of money. The dish was 12 feet long, 12 feet in diameter, and you had to move the dish to point it to different satellites. It was on a rotor, dominated my backyard, and the games, along with everything else, was free. Things have changed in the satellite business, but that's not what we're here. We're here to talk about the Red Sox. In 1980 is one of the Red Sox seasons that tends to get lost. It wasn't like 75, and it wasn't a collapse of like 78, and it wasn't like winning in 1986. There was no pennant, no playoff race for the Red Sox that year that went into September. But when you look back at the roster, you have to ask yourself a question. How did this team not contend? As I was reviewing the season, the roster had the following players, and they should have been a contender, but they weren't. Kari Yastrzemski, Jim Rice was on it, Fred Lynn, Carlton Fisk, Dwight Evans, Rick Burleson, Dennis Eckersley, Bob Stanley were anchored the pitching staff, and joining them for the first time on the roster was Tony Perez. That's quite a remarkable group of ball players, if you ask me. Yet when the season was over, the Red Sox only had an 83-77 record, nowhere close to the New York Yankees at the top of the American League East. And more importantly, although nobody necessarily knew it when opening day arrived, the Red Sox team had become accustomed during the second half of the 70s, was about to come apart. So let's get back to 1980 and let's see how much you remember. The Red Sox came into the season. It was managed by Don Zimmer. Zimmer had been managing the Red Sox since the middle of 76. And during that time, the Red Sox was a perennial contender. They had won a lot of games in consecutive seasons. They won 97, 98, 99 games. But 1978 still hung over the organization. Boston had won 91 games in 79, but finished third, which we discussed last week, behind Baltimore and Milwaukee. Something was missing. So in the offseason, the Red Sox decided to get Tony Perez, hoping that was the piece. As I sip on my Sunday morning coffee, hope everyone's enjoying the Sunday morning. Perez had spent most of the his great years, as a member of the Cincinnati Big Red Machine, and been one of the National League's premier RBI men, and helped the Reds win back-to-back World Series championships. Boston signed him as a free agent in November of 79. Although he was 37 years old, he could still hit pretty well. And here was the lineup on opening day. Remy at second, Burleson at short, Lynn in center, Rice in left. Yastrzemski was a DH. Perez was at first, Hobson at third. Dwight Evans was in right, and the only catcher, that it was the only position they didn't have a top-notch player at. Dave Rader was the catcher. Dennis Eckersley started on opening day. Sounds like a club that should have been pretty good. And they opened up in Milwaukee, lost 9-5. 2 days later, the Brewers beat Boston 18-1. Not exactly the opening everybody was hoping for. The Red Sox recovered somewhat, and April ended with Boston 8 wins and 9 losses. May wasn't much better. They played 500 ball. They played 14-14, my notes say here. So after 2 months, the Red Sox were 22-23. Not very impressive. There were still plenty of individual highlights, though. One came on May 13th. Fred Lynn hit for the cycle against the Twins. Lynn was still one of the most talented players in baseball. Only 5 years earlier, in '75, had become the first player ever to win Rookie of the Year and MVP in the same season. Injuries limited him to 110 games in 1980, as I see here. But when he played, he could still do just about everything. Lynn hit .301 with 32 doubles, 12 home runs, 61 runs batted in, and won another Gold Glove in center field. But Lynn wasn't the biggest run producer on the club. That honor went to newcomer Tony Perez. He had 25 home runs, drove in 105 runs, and at age 38 during the season, Perez led the Red Sox in both categories. Jim Rice had a productive year. He batted .294, 24 home runs, knocked in 86 runs. For Jim Rice, it wasn't a season like '78, but it's still a good season. Fisk hit .289 with 18 home runs. Evans kicked in with 37 doubles and 18 home runs, and Yastrzemski was 40 years old, hit .275 with 15 home runs. With that collection of hitters, the Red Sox just, even though they were that good, couldn't put together enough consistent pitching and winning streaks to stay with the best teams in the division. One of the most interesting players on the 1980 club was a rookie named Dave Stapleton. Stapleton wasn't expected to be one of the stars of the team, but he hit. And he kept hitting. And in 106 games, Stapleton batted .321 with 144 hits and 33 doubles. Stapleton stood out in my mind watching him on TV. I still watch most of the games from that big 12-foot satellite dish. But before long, Stapleton was in the lineup every day. John Tudor showed up. Bruce Hurst, Bob Ojeda started to pitch for the Red Sox in 1980. And those were just the beginning of the future pitching staffs for the Red Sox. The biggest problem in '80 was its pitching. Eckersley had been outstanding in his first 2 years, but 1980 was a tough season for him. He had a .428 ERA, only went 12-14. Torres was a disaster, .508 ERA, 9-16. And when your two best pitchers lose 25 games, you're really screwed. And those were the bright spots. Bob Stanley. Bob Stanley continued to be both a starter and a reliever. He started 17 games, got into 52 games in the season, went 10-8 with 14 games. I know people like to pick on Stanley. He got hit, but his .339 ERA was one of the best on the team, and he was a reliable part of the bullpen. Tom Bergmeyer was also on the pitching staff. He was one bright spot. He pitched in 62 games that year, posted a 2.00 ERA and recorded 24 saves, and made the All-Star team. Player that nobody really remembers, Chuck Rainey, gave Red Sox a small boost as a pitcher, 8-3 with 16 appearances and 13 starts. So after struggling the first 2 months of the season, the Red Sox started to win. They went 16-10 in the month of June. But when July showed up, they went back to their 500 or less than 500 ways, only went 12-16. And at the end of the month, they were a 500 club, 50-49. 100 games into the season, they were a 500 team. August came, and the Red Sox got hot. In August, Boston won 20 of 27 games, and by the 31st, they were 70 wins and 56 losses. The end of August, they won 9 consecutive games, and for a brief moment, you thought they might get back into it. You thought they would make a run. But unfortunately, the Yankees were having a great year, and Boston just was too far behind. The series that probably tells you everything you need to know about the 1980 Red Sox, the Yankees arrived in Fenway Park for 4 games beginning on September 11th. And if Boston had any fantasy of making the final weeks interesting, this was the opportunity. Instead, the Yankees won the first game 8-5. They won the second game 4-2. Then they won 4-3, and then, of course, they swept them 5-3 in game number 4. 4 Yankees victories. The Red Sox came out of the series injured, 75 wins, 65 losses, and they never were thought as a contender the rest of the season. Whatever faint hope we had as Red Sox fans was all gone, and the statistic that tells the story of Boston and New York that year is the Red Sox played the Yankees 13 times, and the Red Sox had only won 3 of those games. So they were nowhere near as good as the Yankees back in 1980. Once again, my memories of the satellite dish watching these games, I still can't believe how big that dish was. The Red Sox also couldn't beat a couple other teams. Against Oakland, Red Sox did play well against some of the other teams, I meant to say. Against Oakland, they were 9-3, California 9-3, Detroit, they were 8-5, but against the team they had to beat, the Yankees, they were 3-10, and that says what you need to know about the season. Another strange aspect of 1980 was where they played their base baseball. Fenway Park was supposed to be a big advantage, but in 1980 they were only 36-45. On the road, they were 47-32. That was not a team meant to play in Fenway Park. The Red Sox team with Rice, Lynn, Fisk, Evans, Yastrzemski, and Perez actually had a losing record at Fenway Park. It was unbelievable. And by late September, the season was finished competitively. Management decided it was time for a change. And with only a handful of games left, Don Zimmer was fired. Johnny Pesky took over. Zimmer finished his portion of the season 82-73. Pesky went 1-4, and the Red Sox finished the season at 83-77. And with the end of 1980, one era of Red Sox baseball was over, because when they returned in 1981, it was a different team. 1980 turned out to be Fred Lynn's final season in Boston. It was Rick Burleson's final season in Boston, and it was Carlton Fisk's final season in Boston. 3 of the mainstays of the 1970s Red Sox teams were about to leave. Don Zimmer was gone. The 1975 pennant winners were no longer together, and a new era in Red Sox baseball, the 1980s, was about to begin. They had, and I don't want to harp on this, but with Yastrzemski, Rice, Lynn, Fisk, Evans, Burleson, Eckersley, and Perez, and the young players coming in, Stapleton, Tudor, Hurst, and Ojeda, that should have been a good team. It just wasn't. 1980 was more of a transition year. And that's what we're going to talk about next week as we hit the 15-minute mark for the first time in a few weeks. We're going to talk about next week, 1981, and those teams with Tudor, Hurst, and Ojeda. And I don't know if you'd ask questions about the final questions you might ask. Perez, like I said, hit 25 home runs at 105 RBIs. It was a good team. They had good players, but they just didn't win. So when someone mentions the 1980 Red Sox, you just don't think of an average team, but you think of a team that just was there. It was a dividing line. It was – things changed. Lynn, Fisk, Burleson, like I said, were gone. Zimmer's gone. Yaz is only going to play for one more year. Rice and Evans were still in their prime. Perez came, played for a couple of years. But it wasn't a championship series. It was a forgettable series. And next week, we're going to talk about 1981 and the beginnings of the team that will lead to the 1986 American League pennant. I'm Bernie Stroum, and this has been another edition of So You Think You Know the Red Sox. Thanks again for joining me as we went back to 1980. Next week, we're going to talk about 1981. I hope everyone has a wonderful Sunday afternoon, and you can join me here at 9 p.m. Pacific, noon Eastern, for the continuation of the greatest, the Boston Red Sox Historical Tournament, where we have our dead ball team facing our 1996 team in game number 5. 1913 leads 4-1. It's an elimination game for 1996. I'll be here in about 45 minutes. Have a good Sunday, everybody.